usually like to be positive about things, but as we all know, Dragon Ball isn't exactly perfect. Hey guys, MasakoX here. Now, a while back, about 3 or so years ago, I did a video talking about my least favourite Dragon Ball Z moments, which you can find up top, and you can check out after this video. Either way, that video catalogued those times within the series which I didn't really agree with, or even made me seethe with annoyance and ire. We all have those moments, and despite Dragon Ball having this huge fandom across the world, it's got some times which are just really not in keeping with the overall rapport of the production that we have. Dragon Ball Super has these moments in spades. Dragon Ball Z had these too, but today's focus is on the latest mainline series. The journey of this show from episode 1 to episode 131 was a very long one, and it definitely was required. For those thinking that it didn't add anything to the overall IP, it certainly did. It is now more adaptable than ever, and thanks to the additional Broly movie throwing things into the mix in a new animation style, Dragon Ball can easily function within the modern sphere of anime, and quite frankly, I think it's in a very healthy state right now when it comes to the overall package. That's not to say that it was an easy trip there though. Today, I wish to recall with you 10 moments within Dragon Ball Super's 131 episodes which gave me either pause for thought, and maybe even times which made me shout out, or more accurately, gesticulate wildly, because the episodes would come out at 2 AM my time, and I don't want to wake anyone up, due to the state of being miffed by what I had seen. Now before you ask, no, I am not going to be doing the obvious thing, and what you may know. The ending of the Goku Black arc is not on this list. As much as I would love to rave about this more and more and more, and make it my worst moment in Dragon Ball Super ever by miles, it's just far too obvious. I'm not going to be touching that right now, because I think there are other moments to consider. I've talked about it enough over the course of a few videos, so I will omit this one, and instead focus on other instances. So here we go. Number 10. The missed opportunity of Captain Ginyu. Ah, Captain Ginyu. Definitely a character who had gained a fair bit of respect within the fandom of Dragon Ball Z, to say the least. His team of misfits under the control of Freeza was a very welcome breath of fresh air, and a brilliant example that just because the Freeza Force was sinister overall, as well as being serious, that didn't necessarily mean they all had to be like that. They were the best team around and genuinely acted like they looked out for one another. They were a team. It was a very interesting addition to the Namek saga and added lots of colour to an otherwise green background. You know, the planet was mostly green. I mean, you can't miss it. We all know that Ginyu ended up as a frog, obviously, through an unfortunate body change, but then we got to see him again, surprisingly, in the body of Taguma. This was different from the movie version of the story, and I will say it was an interesting change, and it at least varied things up a little bit to allow Taguma, or at least his likeness, to be in the story for maybe a little while longer than he was in the movie. Having Ginyu back to some extent and using a character who had less nuanced power signatures, like Goku's, allowed Ginyu to actually have some opportunity to show off his strength and techniques, and maybe get some revenge against Vegeta. That turned out to be just vapor, though. Vegeta quickly dispatched of Ginyu Taguma, and in the laziest way possible. It wasn't even well animated or storyboarded. It didn't look cool. It just happened. One of Vegeta's most apathetic W's ever. Now, I'll not put it too high on the list because it didn't affect the story too much. It was more of a shame rather than a grievance. Number 9. The Potofu arc. Filler arcs are nothing new within Dragon Ball, or any anime for that matter, which are longer than 12 episodes. This 3-episode mini-arc told a simple story about a delivery that ran amok, which also involved Goten and Trunks. Okay, fair enough. They haven't been able to do much lately. We needed some more content with them to at least justify their inclusion in the show, so yeah, why not? It then added some Gotenks action, which wasn't a good sign. Gotenks in Super was nothing more than a sign of comedy, and not even very good comedy at that, but I'll get to more of that later. And even though the dub was able to redeem this arc to a sort of extent with the addition of Brian Drummond as copy Vegeta, it made it a bit more palatable to English audiences. The arc was just very lackluster and a bit of a drag, save for a couple of visual gags. To me, this arc is something which started as one thing, but then quickly ended as another thing altogether. This was meant to be a short arc which focused on Goten and Trunks saving the day, doing some good, helping out an old man rescue his planet after being taken into space purely by accident. If it had been pulled off with the offspring winning out by themselves, this wouldn't have actually been so bad. But This arc is testimony to the whole Goku Vegeta over-reliance thing. Them arriving later on with a copy Vegeta then having to deal with shows that the writers cannot think their way out of a story without calling on the main Saiyans. Yes, Monarca does get the win in the end by pure comedic joy, but we didn't need the Saiyans. If Vegeta hadn't arrived, Monarca would have just won anyway. Number 8, the Space Poachers. Basically, it's a letdown after 17's fantastic debut. In short, it felt like something totally out of place, and was added in for the sake of adding time before going to the tournament itself. In the previous part, we had basically seen Android 17 essentially agreeing to take part in the Tournament of Power. He just needed to say the actual yes thing. But good, he was starting to be convinced. That episode was very good, and was welcomed by everyone, seeing that this underused character was going to be returning, and in a big way. So, how do you celebrate this? Well, okay, give them a bizarre story that is less than an episode long. And granted, it does at least have the motivation of 17 getting his animals back, it's got something to do with them. But we get no backstory for the villains and why they found these particular animals. I know there's not much time to do so, but at least they could have revealed how they found 17's quarry, and how 17's quarry is actually one of the most lucrative in the galaxy. All they needed to do is add some dialogue stating that 17's island had become legend amongst the galaxy, and because of that, it made it immensely valuable. Boom, sorted, instant motivation, which makes sense. Hardly the best way to showcase 17's powers now, is it? Maybe his heart of gold, but not much else. Number 7, Boo going to sleep. This made me angry at the time. What has brought this moment lower down the list though, is that the subsequent plot point that it introduced actually turned out to be pretty good overall. I guess it was kind of worth it. The plot point before that one was that Boo had been steadily getting more and more hype about taking part in the Tournament of Power, actually doing something active for once. He had been excited after his fight with Basil, and probably the gastronomic reward that he would get afterwards. He was keen to train, and he looked it. The first time we had seen Boo motivated in ages. He looked the part, and the new design was something fresh and fascinating. At last, we were going to get some sort of character development for this one. For an episode. After that, we found out that Boo had put the weight back on and fell asleep for 2 months, unable to be risen. So I guess all of that was pointless. I remember being so furious at this happening, and then even more so with Freeza being called up again. But actually, I think I can understand why they did that. That's why it's lower down. You see, had Boo been in the Tournament of Power, it would have lowered the stakes considerably, even more. He could have healed people easily, he could have attached part of himself to the fighters to keep himself in as long as possible, meaning that anyone from Universe 7 would always be in, and he could have blown the arena up. He was too convenient. It took us time for us to realise this, but back then, it was a shocking omission, and it could have worked, and been far more innovative if they actually put some time into it, if done right, obviously. Boo could have pushed into learning new techniques and changing his outlook, fully realising his power even and what he can offer. But no, we weren't going to get that, and instead we got the most infuriating reveal of a plot point and withdrawal ever. The pain has eased over time, but its initial presence was not welcome at all. Number 6, Videl's confirmation of being a background character. It's official. Videl's character is no more. She is now merely Gohan's wife and Pan's mother, that's it. The Videl of old is gone, and instead, we've got even more of a background character than Chi-Chi. At least with Goku's partner, she has some kind of fiery temperament which makes her stand out sometimes. With Videl, she is so unbelievably passive, and unlike her original personality, it's beyond belief. It wasn't too bad in the Beerus arc, and even the Yo Son Goku and his friends return special did a decent job at portraying Videl's character. But where things got really bad was during the mini arc with Barry Khan. Khan's utilization was a little neat callback to the Boo saga, but what made things egregious for me was the attempt at making Videl trust Gohan without question. I can see what they were trying to do. Make it look like Videl trusts Gohan completely, but we already know he's trustworthy. It's so obvious, he's the most likable guy in the show. Videl's reactions throughout all of this just felt too weird. There's no way Gohan would do that. He would never be unfaithful. It felt so flat and unlike her original character model at all. It was the final nail in the coffin. For me, There is no way I'm going to be able to see them going back to the Videl from the end of the Boo arc. She wasn't abrasive by the end of it, but she was perky, assertive, but most importantly, tough. She was training to become stronger with Gohan and to fly. She was the great Saiyaman 2 of all things. Where did that go? And yes, I know being a mother takes up time and such, and priorities change when you get older, but that shouldn't mean you become a cardboard cutout personality-wise. That will not do. Number 5. Anything to do with Gotenks. Oh, Gotenks! Like I briefly touched upon earlier, Gotenks in Super is just bad. Really bad. Despite him being a fusion and something that should be useful in the long run, he's just there for gags. And okay, I know, Gotenks originally was there for gags. He is meant to be more of a comical character rather than a powerful one only, for the purposes of the story. But he's not funny. He's annoying. I will admit that even in Z he was grating, but back then he did provide Super Boo some sort of a challenge for a while, and had some really novel techniques which sort of worked. It showed how talented Goten and Trunks could be, and they could master fusion in a short space of time, but all of that goes out the window because they fuse, Beerus just kind of whips them around for a couple of seconds and then they're done. We forget the undertakings and the efforts they put in originally to master fusion. Now all we remember is that, oh yeah, I want to gnaw my ears off every time Gotenks speaks. I don't think there's much else to say, other than maybe his use in the Potofu arc. I understand that by showing Super Saiyan 3 Gotenks to be weak even against this baddie was meant to look really impactful and tense, but it was revealed too soon and utterly ended any hope for us to see the fusion be effective in any way and for Goten and Trunks to get the win. What made this even more apparent to me is that Goten and Trunks were never used for anything other than dialogue again in the show. Okay, present Trunks and future Trunks had a moment, but that was it. No tournament of power inclusion or even an offer. Nothing. And they're supposed to be the relatable characters for the younger audiences. Right. Number 4. Gohan's lowest ebb. Oh man, this has been talked about a lot, hasn't it? Amongst many circles, Gohan's progression and use in Super has been a hot button topic. We all know that it ended relatively well in the Tournament of Power, Gohan actually using his smarts and growing power to do well against Dispo, and even sort of earning the respect of Freeza. But we mustn't forget where this all came from. All of the actions up to this point were reactive instead of proactive. Gohan had to improve after what we'd seen in the Resurrection F arc. Not even the movie had done him dirty like this. Yes, it was weird seeing Gohan not use his ultimate powers in the movies, but at least he was good enough to not be torn down by the bad guy. In Super though, it was just horrible to witness. It was like the writing staff fully admitting to us that they'd run out of ideas for Gohan and basically had to make him into some kind of weakling, and then the only thing he was good for was just being an interstellar radar for Goku to use to get back to Earth in time. For what was once meant to be the bastion of the next generation, the true defender of Earth after Goku, he's now become a guy who loves conferences just a bit too much. I don't mind him having a scholarly pursuit or anything like that to have balance, but what grinds my gears is that he has no concept of balancing his time out despite having a remarkable academic mind. Surely he would realize that health in mind and body is beneficial to him. Apparently not. His whining was also quite irritating, and the animation quality of some of his scenes did not help. In all, I guess it had to be this much of a grievance to make his return to form all the more sweeter, but it just feels a bit artificial. It's not nice to see. Number 3. Realizing Goku's just wrong. The moment when Goku forgot stuff. Much talked about, but still important. It was the turning point, and made us all fully realize that Goku's character in Super was just not going to sit well with us. In Dragon Ball Z, he had been still the goofball, but when push came to shove, he could easily be quite ruthless and act like a leader of sorts for his friends in the fight against enemies. In Super though, his immaturity had suddenly just taken control of his personality entirely, and led to someone far more impulsive, immature, and erratic than we were actually getting used to. It was a Goku that was true to his form, and yet not true to his original character model. It was weird. We're aware that Goku's not meant to be developed too much. He has a flat character arc. Him being the mainest of main characters sort of forbids him from doing so. Change him too much, and he won't be iconic enough for most audiences to recognize, or more accurately, focus groups to then think, oh no, Goku's so different, he won't be profitable! At the same time though, that sort of happened anyway. Goku in Super is nothing like the Goku in Dragon Ball Z, except right at the end of the series when the stakes were at their highest. His way of convincing Freeza to help was masterful, but that sadly doesn't make up for the fact that for 90% of the series of Super, Goku was just far too unusual to ignore. That whole talisman situation was the biggest example of this. At least Goku's acting more like himself in the Moro arc of the manga, if you didn't know, so there is hope that this can be fixed. Number 2, Piccolo being eliminated. Piccolo just sort of gave up in Super, didn't he? This wouldn't be the first time either. In GT, what was meant to be a noble act of him actually doing a good deed came across as weird. Piccolo just sort of stood on the planet and went, "Yep, I'm just stand here after having done nothing in this arc. Yep, sure it's getting hot." Granted, his act was intended to stop all those who had escaped Hiffle from escaping again, but it wasn't handled well, and that's a common thing in GT. But that's not the main point of this entry though. What is the point is that Piccolo just sort of stopped caring much, really, or the writers more accurately stopped caring about him. In the Universe 6 contest, he could have easily come back in after Frost was disqualified, and he could have had a second chance, but he just sort of allowed Vegeta to do his thing. And yes, I know, you think it might have denied us having Kaba, but they could have easily moved Kaba before Frost. Then it got worse in the Tournament of Power. After a triumphant episode 118 with Gohan and Piccolo working together, things were looking great, and it was pleasing to see him doing well and sticking around for so long in the contest. We thought he was actually going to go the distance. Then episode 119 came along and undid everything. Piccolo was out, and he could have easily stopped that from happening. Has he forgotten about the fact he has stretchy arms? What about his hearing? There was no real reason for him to drop out other than the writers just going, yeah, it's Piccolo's turn. No valid explanation, he was just thrown out, and Piccolo was just unable to think of anything to keep him in. I'm sorry. That was just not on with me. I made a video about it, my super detailed series. I was so angry about it. That's saying something, so you can check that out for more details. The number 1 spot to me is just the worst. Number 1, Jiren's backstory. Manga-wise, his personality and drive is more understandable, but in the main show, he is the most generic brick wall that Goku has ever encountered. Even Major Metallatron has more personality, and he was a robot. Jiren is absolute strength, sure, but he is also absolutely boring. The only way we could ever hope to get behind this guy, or at least understand what his deal is, was for him to have a backstory that was compelling enough and explained well enough to actually make us go, yeah, okay, I can understand why he's like that, okay. It took us over 30 episodes to get to this, but when we got there, what we got was awful and anticlimactic. It was the Batman story. Yes, you might be saying that Goku's backstory was sort of like Superman's, but at least that one had content as well that was original and unique to Goku, and characters there interesting enough to make up for the similarities. It has Bardock, and Bardock's awesome. Not only was Jiren's origin story so bland, it was also too short. If you were going to be telling Jiren's story properly, to me, you need at least half an episode to tell it, ideally a whole one. He's a big character who is meant to be the closest thing to a villain in that arc. He's meant to be the antagonist, and so I feel it would justify more time to explain what his shtick was. We get maybe 2 or 3 minutes instead, and it gave us the basics, basically. It was nothing special, and it basically confirmed to us that the only way you can find Jiren entertaining is to dial your mind back and just go, he's a wall of meat. Just watch him punch Goku really hard and don't really think about it too much. If you wanted to see a more enthralling Jiren, just read the manga. So what do you guys think? Do these moments in Super sit well with you? What are your worst moments in Super? Leave a comment below and let's get this discussion going. And I shall see you in the next video. Catch you later!